Hello, I'm Lee Bernick, Dean of the College of Urban Affairs at UNLV, and I want to welcome you to another edition of the Urban Report, a show about the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and the community in which we live, and the state of Nevada. Today, our first guest will be Regent Michael Wixom. We'd like to welcome you here to the show and appreciate you coming in. You're from Idaho originally.
I am.
And graduated in political science at Idaho State University and went to Utah and got your law degree, and you've been practicing law here for a while.
Since 1986. Yes.
Since 1986. And in 2005, the governor appointed you to the regent, to be a regent. Why did you take on the role of being a regent?
Well, I've always been fascinated by higher education, and since 1986, when I moved to Las Vegas and started practicing law, virtually all of my practice has been focused on financial institutions and development work. And through that process, I began to understand the importance of higher education and the importance of education generally to our community. And I love this place. I think Las Vegas is one of the most interesting, fascinating places in the world. I don't know that you could go anywhere in the world and find a more interesting group of people and a more dedicated and involved group of people, and I'm very committed to this community, and without higher education we can't move forward.
Well, we appreciate you being on the board. You served 2 terms as the president or chair of the
Yes.
board. When you talked about development, let's talk about the role of higher education in the development of the community. And it's especially important today when we hear all about the budget cuts and what might happen to the university system. And can you talk a little bit more about how you see the role of the higher education in development?
I can, and I think it's better to take a broader view of education and business generally. And business, of course, is my focus because I have my own law firm, and as I said, I represent financial institutions, and my practice has been very focused on construction and development through the years, and I've been very close to that process for the 25-odd years that I've lived here in Las Vegas. In September 2009, Forbes published a study. It was a business ranking all the states as business-friendly environments. Virginia was ranked first, even though it has a much higher tax rate than does Nevada. Nevada was ranked 31st. A large reason, or a primary reason for Nevada's low ranking was its educational system, which was ranked 49th by Forbes. CNBC a few weeks ago did a study of business-friendly states. They ranked Nevada 47th in business-friendly states, and again 49th in educational opportunities here. And so it's clear that unless we focus on educational opportunities, unless we provide opportunities for economic development and diversification through education, that we'll never move forward as a community.
So let me just give you another part of this. If we're ranked low in these being business friendly, and the governor, let's say, says, oh, we can't raise taxes because it's going to hurt business, that really is not a good argument. Businesses come here because of the quality of life in the educational system, isn't that right?
Yeah, the International Development, International Development Study Group did a study in 2008 to identify the reasons why businesses locate in particular areas, and there were 7 or 8 reasons. Taxes were 5th or 6th on the list. Number 1 reason was an educated workforce, and so I think there's a huge disconnect in Nevada between our policy and reality. There's been this argument that we've heard, certainly I've heard it ever since I moved to Nevada, that as we keep taxes low, businesses will come here and then we'll somehow prosper. That's an illusion. It's an illusory promise. If we don't focus on the quality of life here in Nevada, if we don't focus on educational opportunities, we'll never move forward and we'll never develop.
Well, how do we get the message across? I mean, it's so popular and easy for the governor to say no new taxes and you just have to reorganize and whatever. How do we really get the message across, or are we getting the message across now to the people of Nevada?
I sense that we are. As I go through the community, even with friends who have been very conservative politically, they come to me and they say, Mike, we can't do this. And we can't do this. This mantra, this cult-like mantra, no new taxes, that somehow that's going to preserve our structure going forward, is so myopic, is so short-sighted. We need visionary leadership, and as we move forward, we have to think about what we want to be like as a community, what we want, what our values are. And we can't allow extreme positions on either side of the political spectrum to drive this discussion, which is what's happening. It's particularly unfortunate that it happens in the context of a special session, because the timing of all of this becomes very, very narrow, and it's difficult for the public to get their views out and to be heard. And my fear is over the next week or so, dramatic decisions will be made, many of those decisions made behind closed doors, without the opportunity for the public to fully invest themselves. Because my experience tells me over the last few months and few weeks that the public is beginning to understand that this is a profound mistake.
The mistake being cutting education in general.
Yes.
Right. And what's the relationship between higher education and K-12 and people want to give K-12 maybe the pass because there's so many more students in the K-12 system than higher ed.
Well, I think first we need to back up and recognize that the first year of college in reality is kindergarten. As you move forward and as you look across the nation at successful systems, truly successful systems begin in kindergarten, and there's a seamless process as students move from grade to grade, and then as they move from high school, a senior year in high school, to the freshman year in college, or a state college, or a junior college, or a community college rather. And those systems are the ones that succeed. We won't succeed educationally in Nevada until we have an overall educational philosophy that takes a student from kindergarten or the first grade all the way through graduate school and recognizes that this is a seamless process. What we've done in Nevada is create this insidious competition between K-12 and higher education. And politically, politicians will pit one group against the other. And the state suffers long term, and all of us suffer long term, because we haven't taken a look at policy initiatives that address education from the very young ages through graduate school. And until we do that, we will never solve our problems in the long term. Okay.
What do you think will happen in the session? What do you hope to have come out of the special session for us in higher education?
Well, I know the legislators won't want to hear this, but I hope it's not a short session. I think a short session would not bode well for our state. A short session would mean that most of these deals have been cut behind closed doors, and the public hasn't had an opportunity to have an input. The only way that we're going to survive as a state is through public input and public discussion. And the shorter the session, the more condensed the process, the less opportunity that we'll have to have our say. We need to have a broad discussion in Nevada about what we want to be. I know the governor, for example, talked about certain educational reforms, and I'm all for talking about educational reforms. I don't have any problem at all about putting any solution on the table, but they don't put all solutions on the table. They put very narrow solutions on the table and then pretend that somehow they're broadening the discussion when they're not. I mean, all of industry needs to be at the table. We need to talk about revenue. It's ironic that the governor is willing to take student tuition up and then somehow say that that's not a tax.
Right.
But of course it's a tax. Shifting financial burdens to students is shifting a tax burden. And I've heard that from legislators, and I've heard it from the governor's staff, and that's just inherently disingenuous.
Yes. Well, we need to wrap this up. I'm sorry that we can't spend more time. We're going to have you back. You are such a great spokesperson for the system.
And thank you for the
opportunity. We want to do this and have you come back some more. Again, we thank you for being here, and we're going to move to a segment. We had our students in Washington, D.C., and one of the students had an opportunity to talk about higher education and other aspects of being a senator. So we're going to move to a story about Senator Ensign right now, and we'll be back with our next guest. Thank you.
In a recent trip to Washington, D.C. with fellow UNLV students, we set a goal to speak to all of those who represent us in Congress. Now, one of the Nevada delegation that we really wanted to speak to was Senator John Ensign. Now, we also understand that a U.S. Senator's schedule is busy, so if a window of opportunity did open up, we had to take advantage of it. Well, on this day, Senator John Ensign, who's also on the Committee of Homeland Security, was in a hearing pertaining to the Fort Hood shootings. Now, we understood that once he was done with his questions, we had a brief window to speak to him and talk about some issues.
Healthcare is at the top of everyone's list in Washington. Here, the senator explains why.
Well, the healthcare debate, it's 1/6 of the U.S. economy. It affects every single American. Everybody's affected by the high cost of healthcare today. Premiums are going up 4 times the rate of inflation. We need to do something about that. It's a question of what to do, and you know, there's a million different opinions on what should be done in this part of the healthcare system, what should be done in that part. The bottom line to me is that if we don't do something about changing people's behavior, getting them to choose healthier lifestyles, quitting smoking, eating right, exercising, things like that, I don't care what healthcare reform there's out there, the costs are going to continue to explode because obesity and smoking contribute to 75% of all healthcare costs. That's why legislation I'm focusing on is on prevention. It's on encouraging people to have healthy behaviors. But the healthcare debate, it's going to be difficult.
With Nevada facing budget cuts once again, Senator Ensign feels diversifying the economy is important.
The biggest issue is always education. It comes back to education. And it's not just our universities, it's also our K through 12 system. Most high-tech companies think that our K through 12 system is not adequate. Their employees don't want to move to Nevada. They think that our K through 12 system is substandard, and we've got to work on that. We've got to get better teachers involved, because teachers are really the key to education in the United States, especially that K through 12 education. Highly motivated, highly trained teachers who will motivate their students to learn, and we've got to focus on that in Nevada. It needs to be a real top priority for us to diversify our economy in Nevada. It really needs to start with education.
Due to the high volume and complexity of its work, the Senate divides its tasks among 20 committees, which Senator Ensign is highly involved in.
First of all, I'm on 5 different committees. The most significant is the Finance Committee. That's the Money Committee. That's where Medicare, Social Security, all taxes are done, trade is done. Very, very significant parts of the, 2/3 of the budget is in that committee. And I chose that committee because, you want to make a difference when the country is going. You got to make a difference on the Finance Committee. I'm also on this Homeland Security Committee. I'm on the Budget Committee. I'm on the Commerce Committee, which is also a very significant committee because it deals with a lot of the high-tech industries, a lot of the regulatory problems or issues that we deal with, whether it's your cell phones, television, phishing. There's all kinds of different issues that deal in commerce. And it's also a great committee to serve on.
After sitting in on the Homeland Security Committee meeting pertaining to the Fort Hood massacre, the senator shares his thoughts.
Well, it's not. The hearing itself it isn't just for public relations. It really is for learning about what we can do in the future, what laws we have to, maybe change, and also give recommendations, though, for instance, to the military. The military does not have policies and procedures where they're required, if they hear something like this, to report it. That's pretty outrageous that they don't have those policies and procedures in place right now. So we learned that today, that's something that we're going to recommend to the military, that they implement these kind of policies and procedures.
With so many responsibilities, the senator touches on the pressures of the job.
I think that there's pressure, being a U.S. senator, no matter whether you're in the minority or the majority, and there are different pressures. It's a great privilege, but at the same time, there certainly is a significant amount of pressure involved because the issues that we're dealing with are so incredibly important. Whether we're dealing with foreign policy and the two wars that we're fighting right now, the healthcare debate, the terrible economy we're in. There's some significant issues that really affect a lot of people's lives.
Now, we all know Senator Ensign isn't the only senator from Nevada in Washington.
You know, my relationship with Senator Reid is fabulous. We have a great friendship. We talk all the time. We disagree on most national issues, but when it comes to Nevada issues, we work incredibly well together. We've worked a lot of pieces of legislation together. He works his side of the aisle, I work my side of the aisle, because most Nevada issues are really not Republican or Democrat. They're really just Nevada issues.
Before Senator Ensign was a senator, he was a congressman, which made the transition much easier.
You know, the transition from the House to the Senate was not that difficult. It was much harder to go from the private sector to the House. But from the House to the Senate, your responsibilities are much greater. But it's also a lot more fun because you can get involved in any issues you want to get involved in. It isn't just in the House. Really, it's whatever committees you serve on, and you're very limited there. That's kind of your area that you get involved in, unless you're in leadership, and that's just very few people. But for the vast majority of members of the House, they're involved in the issues just on their committee. In the Senate, whatever areas you kind of show knowledge in and want to take the leadership on, you can get involved in those areas. And so you can get involved in a wide variety of issues. You have much greater power, much greater influence as a United States Senator than a House member. And you know, I just look at, I'm trying to be the best senator I can be for the state of Nevada. That's where, you know, my future is today, and that's all I'm worried about is today.
So any ambitions for the future?
It literally is. I have to, listen, right now especially, I have to focus on today, and that's what I'm focused on.
With Senator Ensign handling some negative press right now, it's going to be interesting to see what his next step is going to be. I guess we'll just have to do what he said and just worry about today. In Washington, D.C., I'm Andy Gill.
Well, our next guest, and it's a real privilege for me to have my boss on the air, and it's President Neal Smatresk, and we want to welcome you to the Urban Report. And for your first time here, we hope to have you more often and again and again. But I want to start out with a couple of things. First, you were trained as a zoologist, and isn't that right?
Yes,
and
it is.
And I was looking over the record, and you did research on all kinds of things. And one of the things, just as a side note here, a spotted gar. What are spotted gar?
Oh, they're one of the great stories of all time. First of all, they're a living fossil. Gar are a group of fish that is represented only by very few members right now, and they were there way before the dinosaurs. They can breathe air with a lung, and they can breathe water with gills. And because they have both elements of how to breathe, their brains are fascinating, and they have been used by me and others to give us insights into how animals made the transition from water to land.
Okay. Well, I mention this because I think what's important for people to understand is that a president of a university often is really a professor and understands the nature of higher education in a way that in some organizations somebody might be in charge of a gaming institution but wasn't on the floor dealing, but you've been in the trenches with the faculty and you know what it's like to be a faculty member and teaching and doing research, and I wanted to make that point out, very clear that you're a scientist and a professor first in this thing. We just got done having a clip by a student who, in talking to Senator Ensign, and Senator Ensign emphasized education. And here we are just before a special session, and we're talking about cuts to higher education and to K-12. What's the disconnect here? I mean, he talked about how important higher education is, and yet somehow there seems to be a disconnect that we can just cut education and not have it have any impact. What do you think is the problem?
Well, it's the problem between the political world and what's right. I think everybody knows that education is the key to a better tomorrow and a better future. And I don't know one person in the world that doesn't want their children to have better educational opportunities than they had. And that's something we can all acknowledge on a gut level. But the disconnect is I'm a politician and I can talk about education, but at the end of the day, it's kind of hard to fund, and higher ed's really easy to cut because we tend not to be very good advocates for ourselves, and we don't always tell our story to the public in a way that gets the public up in arms about us like they might over K-12 education.
Okay. Well, what's the story? I mean, when you say what's the story, how does higher education impact. We talked to Regent Wixom before, but let's talk about how UNLV might impact the community and lead the way for our community to move out of the recession and into a brighter future.
Well, you can take a look anywhere you want in the country, and the level of economic diversification is directly proportional to the number of bachelor's, master's, and PhD degrees of the citizens in that region. I'm going to give you a couple simple examples. You take the best example of all time, which is the North Carolina experiment. Huge investment in higher ed has created one of the most diversified economies of any state in the country, and has really changed forever an economy that was dedicated to extractive industry, primarily tobacco, to an economy that's got biomed, biotech, nanotechnology and electronics, and all kinds of other real diverse and highly profitable knowledge-based industries. If you also ask, how does that city stack, how does that region stack up? Take Raleigh-Durham. They were recently ranked #1 in terms of degree attainment of any city in the country. Who would have thought North Carolina would be the bastion of American intellect? If you take in that same survey that ranked the Raleigh-Durham area #1 in the country for numbers of degrees produced, in essence the smartest region in the country, Las Vegas ranked next to last. Why? We're a brand new city with a very young university. We don't have a lot of people who've achieved a bachelor's level or higher education. In fact, we have about 1 in 5 of our citizens having achieved a higher education degree. Now, even with a close neighbor experience, you take a look at Denver. 2 out of 5 citizens has a bachelor's there. It took them about 20 years, but they're now beginning to have a biomed industry, a natural energy, green energy industry, and they haven't suffered nearly as bad as we have at the hands of this recession. So the promise of higher education is directly correlated to regional prosperity, and while we're a young institution, we're doing our job. I got a great stat for you, Lee. In the last 10 years, Nevada has had the biggest change in the percentage of master's degrees in the population and granted of any state in the country. That's the beginning of that promise that leads to economic diversification, a better educated population, better health care, better business services, better infrastructure, and better education.
And the better education, you talk about graduate education, but you also mentioned about the promise. One of the things that I found when I became dean is, in a way, is the level of commitment we have to undergraduate education and how that is core to the university. And I wanted to talk to you about what the potential cuts would have on the impact for our undergraduates.
Well, the cuts are going to impact both graduate and undergraduate populations. There's no questions about it. Right now, the governor's proposed 10% cuts for all of education. Once again, higher education's been singled out for what I would consider a punitive additional cut, in this case 1.75% more than our K-12 colleagues. And of course, in the last go-round, K-12 increased 10%, we decreased 24%. So for some reason, the governor doesn't seem to value higher education. In this round, that 10% of cuts is going to lead to a sharp reduction of our ability to run the university. Our academic support staff is going to decline our ability to...
Let me just interrupt. When you say academic support staff, what are we talking about here?
We're talking about student services, even simple things like enrollment management, the ability to admit people and deliver financial aid, orientation of students to the college environment, and of course campus life activities and things like participation in our recreation center, which is part of a healthy lifestyle, or even our wellness program where students who are sick get care. These things are all being threatened on the non-academic side of the house. On the academic side of the house, the sobering and harsh reality is I believe we will lose 6 to 7 departments over the next year. And that's departments that have staff, people who have jobs, as well as a lot of majors. And when I added it up, those departments that are those I believe we could probably afford to lose the most, not that we can really afford any, serve 2,000 FTE full-time students.
So we lose, what you're really saying is that there are 2,000 students who potentially could go to the university, could potentially get an education, who could have a better career, and they're not going to be able to get that because the governor is talking about having these budget cuts of 10%.
At a time when there's a greater need for higher education than ever. I talk to my friends and I joke with them in our local entertainment industry, in the casino industry, and they say, gee, things are down and we're cutting just like you. And I said, yes, but your business is down. Our business is up, because during a recession, people come back to the university and they need that opportunity to retool so that they can participate in a new, better economy and a better future. Right now, I'm afraid that we're going to close the door to opportunity to many of our Nevada children. And what really worries me is that if they don't go to UNLV, I believe they'll leave this state and they'll never return. And I don't think that's healthy for our state.
No, we need the students to be here, and we need the future of Nevada is in those students. And the potential cuts are just dramatic. You talked about cutting departments, and we hear the phrase vertical cuts, horizontal cuts. Can you explain why maybe these vertical cuts, the cutting of programs, has to be done, and you can't do what the governor says. The governor says, oh, they're a big organization, you cut a little bit here, you cut a little bit there, and everything will work out.
Well, we've cut a little bit here and a little bit there to the tune of about $42 million so far. And we're still hanging on by the skin of our teeth. But what those horizontal cuts have done, in other words, through hiring freezes, you take whatever you can find in terms of non-replacements, what they've done to us is they've weakened us across the board. That means that upper division courses are being poorly served. The students that we have are having trouble getting classes, having trouble getting graduating in a timely fashion. And you take some of your really great, strong programs and you weaken them. Vertical cuts will go in a little bit more surgically and help us to maintain our core strengths.
Okay. Well, that's a good explanation, and hopefully we won't have to have too many of those cuts. We have to wrap this up now, and I appreciate you stopping by, and hope to have you back again and to hear, and hopefully a better future for us and a better prognosis about what's going to happen. So I want to thank you for stopping by, and I want to thank all of you for watching the Urban Report. If you have some ideas or some questions about what you would like to see, you can email me at lee.bernick, bernick, @unlv.edu. Thank you for watching the Urban Report.